I think the national response has reflected the urgency of having both a medical and an economic emergency at the same time. But when you look at the international response, which has prompted this letter that is signed by more than 200 people today to the G20, it has been very poor. And I think we've got to show now why it is necessary that the G20, which is after all the premier organization for international economic cooperation, should meet as soon as possible, and certainly not delay meeting as it plans until late November this year, and deal both with the health crisis, where we need to avoid a second wave, and particularly one coming out of Africa and the developing countries, and on the economic side, when you need global coordination to move from what you might call the rescue operation. That's what we've been involved in, saving companies, helping people keep their income, putting money into health, to the next phase, which is actually the planning of a global recovery. And on that, I think every country needs to be able to work together so that we can restore global trade, as well as maximize the stimulus that can come from countries working together.
How worried are you, Mr. Brown, about the impact on various emerging markets without this coordinated international response that so far you feel is lacking?
I think it's desperate, because I think what's happening is the number of cases is still rising around the world. It was running 2 days ago at 1 million cases extra every week. I think also the 100 countries that I know and more have been applying to the IMF for emergency help. We know that 400 million more people will go into poverty. 260 million more people will suffer from malnutrition. And we know that unless we act, these countries are not only in danger of having a long recession, indeed in danger of going into depression, but equally at the same time, they cannot, without our help, solve their immediate health problems, and they become a danger to the rest of the world if disease comes back from these countries into countries like America and into the rest of Europe. So there is an imperative for the G20 to come together, to agree a recovery plan, and to agree to cooperate more intensively to prevent a second wave of this disease.
You mentioned there the G20 being delayed till November. The G7 has now been pushed back as well. And most recently as well, President Trump has withdrawn the US from the WHO. Can there be an international coordinated response that as you say, is needed without leadership from President Trump and the United States?
America has always led. In a unipolar age after 1990, America preferred to act multilaterally. Now we're in a multipolar age, and it's undoubtedly the case there are many centers of power and influence. America seems to want to act unilaterally, and we've seen the leaving of the WHO, but also, of course, the leaving of UNESCO, the breach in the Iran treaty, the climate change treaty being pushed out, SALT, the treaty. All these things show that President Trump has been, if you like, putting the ideology of America first into global action. We need now to dissuade him and his administration from this. I think they know that they need to help avoid a second round of the disease around the world. I think they also know that unless the vaccine, when it comes, and the treatments, when they're available, are distributed right across the world, we cannot eradicate the disease. If we eradicate it in one country, but not in other countries, it is still there to come back to haunt us. And I think they will begin to understand, as you look at the trade figures, but you also look at the impact on the American economy, that you will need some form of global cooperation to get growth back to the level it was before the virus hit us. So in all these areas, I think it's the duty of the other G19, if you like, to persuade the America administration that we need to act globally. And I would look to Britain and the rest of Europe to persuade President Trump that to hold an event with only 10 countries invited to the White House is really to divide the world and not to unite it at a moment when the verdict of history will be very harsh if we fail to get our collective act together.
I wanted to pivot, if I may, Mr. Brown, from the lack of an international response, and just specifically at the scale of monetary and fiscal stimulus we've seen in the last couple of months, and whether you fear whether it's going to significantly distort market pricing in the long term, coming just a decade, of course, after another bout of significant monetary easing. Do you think there are long-term implications for the market now mispricing risk over the long term?
I think things have changed substantially since 10 years ago. You know, I argued for a fiscal stimulus in 2009, and I think we were punished very heavily in Britain and in Europe because austerity then became the name of the game after we left office. And it wasn't fashionable to think that a Keynesian solution that to create demand in the economy because nobody else could do it was in any way forward, even to deal with the immediate situation after 2010. I think attitudes have now changed, and I think the fiscal expansion is seen as necessary, even by people who are on the right of politics and not just on the left. I think people know that interest rates are low and therefore the cost of running a deficit is low. But I think people also know that there is a limit to monetary action in the longer run. You can use it to create liquidity, but you need this fiscal response in the longer run. So what governments are going to have to get used to is managing the debt that they've created, and that will lead to a major debate in every country about what is the right plan for the way forward. The question then is inflation going to recur in the economy? At the moment, it looks unlikely, but of course, if you create such new amounts of new money, there is always a danger of it coming back.
Mr. Brown, I wanted to ask you about Hong Kong. 7 former UK foreign secretaries, including your former close colleagues Jack Straw and David Miliband, today co-signed a letter saying that the UK had a, quote, moral and legal responsibility to the people of Hong Kong, end quote. Do you agree?
I think what they're proposing is the right thing, to bring together countries that want to see the agreement that led to the changeover in Hong Kong in 1997, to see that agreement fully implemented. And of course, the issue in that agreement that worries people is freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. When I was Prime Minister, had a human rights dialogue with China. I think we need to extend that human rights dialogue. I think we need to raise the fears that we have. And of course, that is a distinct issue from the issue of security, which is the reason why the Chinese authorities are claiming that they're acting at the moment. So I favor the initiative that is being taken. But I would say one thing. We're in a major health and economic emergency. And there are going to be differences on trade, on currency, on the future of Hong Kong, differences on Huawei as well, the technology company. But we cannot afford not to cooperate on issues that affect the future of people's lives and livelihoods in this medical and economic emergency. And whatever differences there is between America and China, between Europe and China, we simply have to understand that we need to cooperate to get through this economic and medical emergency.